Namaste. Welcome to Indian Knowledge Systems Primer Course for Children. In the series of lectures on Indian yogic tradition, today in this session we will be looking at yoga and cognition. Previously, we saw yoga and mind, wherein we understood what is the modern psychological process and how did yogic psychology differentiate the psychological process into multiple finer instruments so that we can calibrate and configure. So, now in this session we will look at from the point of cognition, point of view of cognition. Before we delve into what is the relation of yoga, how does it affect or influence the cognitive process, we will try to understand some fundamentals in neuroscience. What is neuroscience? It is the study of the nervous system and the brain center. That is what is called as neuroscience, simply put. So, basically the brain has three main parts. There is an illustration of the brain to the right side in the slide, you can see. So, the brain has three main parts, that is the cerebrum. The whole colored thing here is all of this is called cerebrum. The next one is the cerebellum, and then there is the brainstem, this orange wala. So, this is the whole brain. These are the brain, human brain is divided into three main parts, the cerebrum, cerebellum and the brainstem. The cerebrum is further divided into four parts, these colored ones, the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe and the temporal lobe. The four parts are the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe and the temporal lobe. So, each of these lobes have specific function demarked to them. The frontal lobe is with respect to attention control, decision making, reasoning, control of movements, voluntary control of movements and speech. All of this is taken care by the frontal lobe. Parietal lobe is with respect to sense of touch, integration of all the sensations, spatial awareness, visual motor coordination, hand-eye and all of those coordination, that is taken care of by the parietal lobe. Occipital lobe specifically is for visual information processing and vision. Occipital lobe takes care of the whole vision part. The last one, which is the temporal lobe, it is useful, it impacts the hearing, it helps with language comprehension, memory and sensation of smell. All of this is taken care of in the temporal lobe. Next comes the cerebellum, the second main part, which is cerebellum. The whole body's balance and coordination is taken care of by cerebellum. The brainstem also controls few coordinations, but it is with respect to the vital and the involuntary functions such as that of the heartbeat, respiration. All of this is being controlled by the brainstem. Let us move on. Now, let us try to understand in the emerging field of neuroscience, what were all the emerging researches that happened which put both neuroscience and yoga at par with each other so that they can feed into each other, they can inform each other's research, and that is how the new field of yogic neuroscience came into being. So, now let us try to understand some four very key research studies that have happened in this particular area, wherein the neuroscientific problem has been given very specific yogic interventions and the results have been quantifiable. For example, there were fMRI studies that were conducted for understanding emotional regulations. The study had participants who were yogic practitioners. So, during a very emotionally charged condition, the yogic practitioners, they were able to, they exhibited that their superior parietal lobe got activated. This superior parietal lobe deals with voluntary attention direction, meaning when the superior parietal lobe is activated, lobule is activated, what happens is that attention span is increased. There is a continuous attention that happens during that time. This happened during an emotionally charged up time. Similarly, such sustained attention and mindfulness were also happening during this time. At the same time, the second point is that of the other parts of the brain which are related to empathy and a certain sense of detachment from the emotions and awareness of the emotions. All of these were also activated for the yoga practitioners. This enhances emotional flexibility, acceptance and non-attachment. Even during a very highly charged up emotional situation, if one is able to consciously with full awareness maintain the emotional flexibility, maintain a certain sense of acceptance and non-attachment, then that is a tremendous feat. And these yogic practitioners, they were able to do it. So, one can clearly understand that such problems can be taken care of by appropriate yogic intervention. The next research study that I would like to highlight at this juncture is that of the enhanced parasympathetic network, the enhanced parasympathetic control. So, yogic practitioners genuinely had an increased parasympathetic response to emotional stimuli, and their HRV, the heart rate variability, was also high because of that. That is a good thing, because it indicates that yoga has the potential in balancing the nervous systems using the parasympathetic branch. That is what this proves. So, what is parasympathetic nervous system? Can anyone answer what is a parasympathetic nervous system? This is the nervous system that relaxes your body completely after periods of stress or danger. So, you have been through a period of stress or danger, then it settles down, your parasympathetic nervous system gets activated and it puts you in a certain state of rest. This parasympathetic nervous system also helps sustain life processes such as digestion, and it will also help people feel safe and relaxed around them. So, all this is there, but the first response would be to that of the stress or danger. So, this is the case with respect to the parasympathetic control. Okay. So, similarly, we have the next research I would like to point out here is that the linking of attention and yogic breathing. This is a critical parameter. We were able to see that the attention span significantly increased if the alternative breathing practice or coherent breathing technique was involved. The locus coeruleus in the brainstem is a primary source for alertness hormone nor adrenaline, that is the alert hormone. So, through the breathing practice, this bridges our attention system and the respiratory system very clearly, thus suggesting that pranayama and yogic meditation can amplify attention and emotional processes. This is what this proved. The last but not the least is the immediate benefits of breathing techniques such as that of Kapalabhati. Any high frequency breathing technique can be taken. So, we can see that such breathing techniques generally reduces anxiety, boost attention in cognitive tasks. It helps in these lines, especially among pre-teens, suggesting its utility. You can see that it will enhance the academic outcomes as well. Okay. Now, another aspect of cognition is that of the executive cognitive function. In recent times, there has been umpteen number of studies that is happening in this particular segment of knowledge. So, we will try to understand why it is important. Another name for executive function is that of cognitive controlled functions. So, if a person is said to have a good executive cognitive function, that means the mental processes that are activated during the complex tasks, they will go on, but at the same time automatic or habitual thoughts and behaviors are also inhibited. So, two things happen when somebody has a high executive function means, one is that the complex task which requires the time and space and attention will go on, but at the same time the habitual thought patterns, whichever were automatic, the behavior, all of this will change. So, this executive function is very critical, especially if you have to implement a long term project that is going to require sustained effort. A long project and a sustained effort will demand for a good skill in executive function lines. So, one can understand that these are also essential for solving complex systemic problems. Which is essential? Executive function is very essential for solving complex systemic problem. Example of some cognitive, some executive functions are that of self-control, creativity, flexibility. Now we have understood what neuroscience is. Basic fundamentals of neuroscience we tried to attempt to understand. Then we moved on to how prevalent neuroscience and yoga are being treated in the same table. There are a lot of research talks that happen at a very interdisciplinary level between these two subjects we just saw. So many very specific 4 research studies we went through. Next we came on to the executive cognitive function. We defined what is an executive cognitive function, how does it work, and how what are all the critical tasks it does for us to understand. This is what happened. Now we will further understand what are all the functions that are included in the executive cognitive function. Number 1 is that of inhibition. Inhibition means it will include self-control and selective attention. Both these components will be included in the executive function called inhibition, inhibitory control. Second is that of working memory. We will shortly see what these are. So, working memory is also very important because Then comes cognitive flexibility, meaning they should be for example, if you take a house, if you take a job, all the people, the team in that particular office should all come together and they should work very closely to attain to any clarity or creativity for that matter. So, this is an example, this is an illustrative example of what are all the executive functions that we have spoken about till now. Now, let us talk about executive cognitive function, specifically inhibition. Inhibition has 2 aspects, self-control and selective attention. Self-control we all know, controlling or balanced or regulated way of emotional response and avoiding impulsive reactions. We do not go and offload our anger on somebody else. Selective attention, attention to task and focus on completing it without any distraction. The push to give the current task to move on to more enjoyable one, that is also selective attention. So, related to the aspect of delayed gratification. Now, talking about delayed gratification, what we try to do with respect to delayed gratification is, it is also an inhibitory response only, wherein we are sacrificing an immediate pleasure for a greater and a long term benefit. That is what we are doing with respect to delayed gratification. Okay. Now, let us move on to the second executive function, which is working memory. So, the types of working memory used, there are a lot of different types of working memory. Temporarily holding the information, for manipulating the information, all of this is being done by the working memory. Essentially for understanding events that will unfold over the time. So, working memory specifically is important because right now whatever the details that is presented to you, you will be holding it in your memory, and once during the course of time when the actual event unfurls, you will be able to retrieve this data and use it to your appropriate, you can use it for an appropriate cause. So, once again I am repeating that working memory is very essential for understanding events which will include unfolding and all of that. Okay. Working memory also supports the cause and effect relationships. Okay, clearly supports the cause and effect relationship. A lot of planning, mental health and language comparison, all of this can be enabled by the working memory. So, we have seen the three different aspects with respect to executive functions. Now, let us understand what is the importance of the executive functions. So, we already saw what are all the three aspects with respect to executive function. Number 1 is the inhibitory control, number 2 is working memory, number 3 is the cognitive flexibility. So, all of these are very essential for reasoning, problem solving, decision making and planning. So, this way these executive functions are very significant and critical. Similarly, they impact our various life aspects such as the physical health, education, work, relationships, social order, mental health, all of these will be affected by the executive functions. What are all the things that will influence the executive function if you see? Stress, sleep, loneliness, poor diet, drug abuse, exercise, all of these can definitely affect the executive function. One critical study points that even in elderly, if we can ensure physical fitness, then it will definitely boost executive functions. Isn't that amazing? Moving on. Now, let us try to map the cognitive executive functions and the yoga. How can this feed into cognitive functions? Let us try to understand. So, the core of any yogic practice is that of balancing one's prana level. What is prana? Prana is understood as vital energy. Life's vital energy is called as prana. This affects the emotional and cognitive processes. When you are prana high, you are generally very energetic, happy, grounded. You will be very outspoken, you will be able to do tasks, you will generally be very cheerful. When your prana down, there will be a lot of clutter in the mind, you will be very indecisive, emotionally driven and all of that as well. You will feel fatigue and things like that. So, one can understand that when the brain, especially the brain as an organ, requires maximum prana. So, insufficient supply leads to restlessness and negativity in brain. Okay. So, that said, pranayama practices such as deep inhalation and exhalation practices, alternative breathing practices, all of these help maintain and increase the prana level, thereby influencing the cognitive functions directly. So, we can see yoga practices, by boosting the prana, they help to detach from the sensory pursuits. So, when your prana is high, you are also not too very emotional or too clingy, you will be very independent, self-reliant and all that. So, it helps to detach from sensory pursuits and conserve energy for creativity and spirituality. That is why yogic tools are useful for raising the prana level, thereby they will result in high order cognitive functions. At the same time, they will help detachment from the sensory pursuit, conserve the energy, boost creativity and focus on spirituality. Now, let us try to understand what are all some more research findings with respect to yoga and cognition. So, we previously saw how neuroscience and yoga as a discipline, as a science, they were able to feed into each other's research pursuits. Now, we will see how yoga and cognition flares in the research field. So, with respect to yoga and mindfulness, when you take up mindfulness, yoga definitely improves the executive functions. This can be measured using multiple tasks such as Stroop test, backward digit span, a trail making test. All these instruments, research instruments are useful to measure if the executive function has increased or not. Thereby the cognition would have also increased by a specific yogic intervention, and there has been enough and more proofs along these lines as well. Next, with respect to Hatha Yoga we already saw it reduces the craving, it gives a very good robust health. At the same time, it also benefits executive function across diverse populations as well. There are research studies pointing to this insight as well. With respect to meditation and brain imaging, we can see that structural and functional brain changes can be affected by lengthy meditative times. The lot of when you sit for long hours of meditation, structural and functional changes happen in the brain. Thereby, they will also affect the changes related to executive control. Positively it will impact. So, mindfulness in children, this is a very interesting insight. So, we would want to preserve attention, right? We would like to increase the attention span in children usually. So, mindfulness is one way of doing it. So, it preserves, mindfulness in children preserves the attention. It also regulates the default mode network. Now, what is this default mode network? If you understand, this is the set of neurons which are situated at some place in the brain which are related with mind wandering and task unrelated thoughts, things that will divert us from the task in hand. Such things are called, ascribed to the default mode network or DMN. So, it will regulate, mindfulness regulates the DMN and thereby the central executive network also. They have an inverse correlation. So, if DMN is regulated well below, then the central executive network, the cognition will be very high because the attention span automatically will get increased. So, we could see lot of exciting synergies between yoga and cognition, yoga and neuroscience also as a field. So, we can see that yoga practices align very well with the modern neuroscientific findings to enhance cognition. This is something that we can clearly see as well across these multiple research studies that we have been discussing till now. Now, let us try to understand with respect to memory, what sort of influence does yoga have? So, memory process, if you see, how does it happen? There is a sensory input that gets encoded. When we pay attention to that sensory input, that data gets transferred to our short term memory. If there are more than one repetitions, then this short term memory data also gets transported to the long term memory. And thereby, when there is a recall protocol happens, it can come back to the short term memory through retrieval process, or sometimes we might even forget. So, if we forget, then it goes to the other bin. So, this you can see there is a very nice illustrative or rather a directed illustration of how the memory process generally works. Okay. So, we can see that by yoga, interventions in yoga, how the memory process is affected, is influenced. We will try to see that now. Is this understandable? So, we get a sensory input, we get a stimuli, then the sensory memory processes it, it is stored there. If we pay attention, it gets moved to the short term memory. Consistent rehearsing and repetition makes it move to the long term memory from short term memory. Encoding happens there. Then from the long term memory, it is a retrieval process. It comes back to the short term memory and then we are able to retrieve it. Otherwise, sometimes if we are not able to retrieve, then it will go to, we would have forgotten it by then. This is the general flow chart of how the memory process works. Now, what can yoga do here? How can it help in the memory process? So, some key benefits are listed here with respect to when you do an yogic intervention, what are all the key benefits that could be reaped by that. Number 1, spatial, verbal, working memory. All of this working memory we already saw. All of this can be enhanced by yogic tools such as that of pranayama, asanas, hatha yoga. All of these help enhance the spatial, verbal and working memory. It also definitely improves the blood flow to the brain, thereby increasing its memory power as well. Recall will happen better. It reduces stress, thereby we can think clearly. That is one more advantage of yogic interventions. It also very critically some specific, for example Kapalabhati, it clears off the mind, it sort of clears the mind and it makes space for new memories. It also enhances neuroplasticity. What is neuroplasticity? We will see now. So, it enhances neuroplasticity. It also promotes a very healthy brain. So, we could see that such very useful enhancements can be done simply by employing or habituating simple yogic tools into our daily lives. So, neuroplasticity, as I mentioned earlier, it is enhanced by yogic interventions. This is where this neuroplasticity is the ability of the nervous system to change its activity in response to an intrinsic or an extrinsic stimuli. We are not too conditioned, we are quite fluid there. Thus, we are able to respond appropriately to an intrinsic or an extrinsic stimuli automatically. It has got more to do with the reorganization that can happen in the brain, structural functional reorganization that can happen in the brain. That is called neuroplasticity. Okay. Alright. So, now we are able to understand how there is a lot of relevance for even if you take the aspect of cognition with respect to brain functions, there is so much that yoga can contribute to the cognitive faculty. There is so much of insights that we can draw from the core yogic texts, design of experiments we can do along those lines to improve and verify cognitive functions. In this particular lecture, we specifically saw for the executive functions, which are higher order brain functions. Okay. So, that is about it in this session. Thank you.